Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. I don't normally do spotlight videos, I tend to do them in sets, but this Dendrobium senile generates an awful lot of interest, probably just because it's quite different. I mean, I have no other plant like this that's got really hairy pseudobulbs that look like tarantula legs. So from that point of view it is unusual. Now you have to bear in mind that this isn't a plant, it's actually quite a few plants. The main plant is over here, there's a little one here, another one up the top, and then another one lower down below those two. So there are in fact 4 plants on here. When I bought it, I must admit I did think it was a single plant, but when I got it home it was on a cork tile, this type of thing, which I'm not too keen on purely because of its appearance. There's nothing wrong with it, but to me it doesn't look as good as the natural cork bark. So I decided to repot it on a piece of cork bark, and when I unmounted it I realised it hadn't been on that mount very long because it wasn't really attached, and it was in fact several plants cleverly placed to look like one big one. So I ended up with, there were 5 originally, but one tiny little one didn't make it. So in fact there's 4 separate plants on there. And this one over here, the largest, you don't tend to see many much bigger than that. The reason is they're not as easy to grow as a lot of other dendrobiums, and it's difficult to work out why. It's just a plant at the end of the day, it's just an orchid. It's very temperature tolerant, it'll put up with quite a lot of heat, and it doesn't mind low temperatures. In fact, come the winter time it's going to need them, and it comes from areas that have a wet and a dry season. And effectively, obviously, the growing season would be the wet season. And it does get a hell of a lot of wet during the growing season. So as far as this is concerned, it is its growing season now. It's pushing out quite a few new growths in quite a few places. So it's going to, by the end of this year, it will have doubled in size. And it's pushing out an awful lot of roots. They're quite difficult to see because they get straight in. That's about the only ones you can see down in through there, but they're quite fleshy, quite large roots. They seem to be produced after the new growths have got going, so rather than at the same time as the new growths start, they seem to be produced a bit later than that, so sort of part way through their growth cycle. It doesn't grow much bigger than this. These are reasonable size canes. As I say, it is a miniature. It has a spreading habit. It will sort of crawl out sideways and just expand its area that it covers, and the new growths can come out in all directions. The leaves themselves are quite flimsy and absolutely smothered in tiny white hairs. They don't break off when you touch them. So as anybody with very, very sensitive skin could possibly have a problem with touching those, but I've never come across that, I must admit. But then I don't know many people that attempt to grow this. So anyway, this one's coming on fine. As far as looking after this is concerned, there isn't much moss on this mount. It's a very thin layer. Now there are places where you can read that this one does better potted than mounted. Well, if that's your preference, have a go. But because I've got so many mounts, this is not a problem to look after for me, because it's just in amongst all the others. And quite honestly, through the growing season, it gets treated exactly the same as all the others. Feed and water well. Yeah, it's as simple as that. It's growing. It needs that. And that would coincide with the wet season, when it would be doing most of its growing. Now it's definitively deciduous, and the leaves normally drop. This is a little worrying if you're not used to the resting type dendrobiums. They push on their growth through the season, yeah, all nice and bright green, yeah, nice green canes. The canes eventually colour up, as I say, look more like tarantula legs, and then it will eventually, the season will finish and it will start going into its winter rest, where you reduce the feed down gradually, and then after you've got the feed down to nothing, you start reducing the water. And at this time it would coincide with leaf fall, so at that point this is going to need some bright light. Now, I say that definitively because I'm growing in the UK and we don't get really bright light for any length of time during the winter, so I have to give this as much light as I possibly can. All my shade netting comes off in the winter months, from end of November, beginning of December through into the start of February. There is no shade netting on here, so it'll be in the sun if the sun comes out, which isn't that frequent in the winter, but it does, so it'll get full sun. And during that rest period it will dump some leaves. It's doing a few now. They will turn yellow and they will fall, leaving the completely bare canes. And then eventually, you know, you should get some buds and followed by some blooms. I'll put a pop-up of the bloom. They are substantially sturdy, I think is the expression. They've got a very waxy look and feel to them. There's nothing flimsy about them at all. They're good sturdy blooms, and the most fantastic yellow with a green centre. The green fades a little bit once they've been open a while. They last quite a good amount of time for winter resting type dendrobiums, because some of them are incredibly short-lived, but these don't last bad at all. And I would suggest that the drop in temperature is quite important, especially at night during those winter resting days. But probably more important is the brightest light possible during the day, because that really is how it would live. Yeah. So all this business about withholding water for 2.5, 3 months, I don't agree with. I never have, because I don't believe there's such a thing as no water where orchids grow. There would be some, even if it's only morning dew or mist, they would get some hydration. So withholding water for that length of time doesn't agree with me at all. And my winter resting types did the best ever last year, all bar a couple blooms. This one even bloomed and I didn't even rest it because it was out of season. It's kicked back into its season now, with all these new growths going on through the proper growing season. Small parts of the plant may be slightly out as I go into the resting period this year, but in the main this plant will have kicked back into its normal cycle of effectively 2 seasons. A wet season where it grows well and is quite shaded. These resting type dendrobiums don't need bright light when they're growing. In the growing season they would be under leaf cover. They don't get bright light. It's not the light that's important in the growing season. It's keeping the humidity up and keeping them well watered and fed to push on these new growths. Now that doesn't mean they stay soggy. That's why I mounted this, because I would worry in a pot that the roots would stay soggy, and on this plant, as dendrobiums go a little unusually, the roots are prone to rotting if they stay soggy. So by mounting it, I know that it will dry every day, and then it can have some more. If we get a dull, cooler period, that might go to 2 days. But basically it dries off in between watering. That's how I treat it, and it is growing well. Yeah. So yep. That's the plant. I got it in Malvern last year, so I've had it just over a year now. And my previous one that was growing really well just keeled over. I've never really known why, but it did. It started to go downhill late in the summer into the autumn, and like an idiot, not only did I try and rest it, that was the first year I took my resting orchids up into the spare bedroom. There's no humidity up there. It did a couple of them in, including my original senile. So this is a replacement, and at the moment it's doing very well. I'm very pleased with its progress. Yeah, and it did bloom. So There you go, but it is a winter resting type, so during the growing season in the UK, which is like from March onwards through to as long as the season lasts, I don't go by the calendar. As far as I'm concerned, if we get good weather in the late autumn, I will keep my plants growing. They will just start their rest later that year. Whereas if we get a dull, miserable autumn where the temperatures are starting to drop, then that's when the resting period will start. But I aim at somewhere around the mid to end of November, and I start reducing the water down at the feed down at the beginning of November. But it is weather dependent. I don't do it by the calendar. It doesn't get to the 1st of November and I think, right, you're not getting any, no more food for you. If the canes are still growing and the weather's still good, the light's good, daytime temperatures are reasonable, I'll let them grow. Give them an extra couple of weeks, get another leaf on each cane, something like that. So I don't do it by the calendar. The weather really dictates. But yeah, coming on well, and an interesting plant to grow. The larger plant here is probably going to drop its leaves on at least 3 of those canes, so they will then look like that one. Tarantula legs. Because once they're leafless, they really do look like those giant hairy spider legs. So if you're a bit funny about spiders, this may be not the one for you. But an unusual plant. I've never seen an orchid with so much hair on all of it. It's all over the canes and all over the leaves. And as such, it's of high interest as far as I'm concerned, because it is different. So there you go, a little sort of thing about Dendrobium senile. Temperature ranges, I mean, it's very tolerant. It's classed as cool to warm growing. So a lot of that would probably depend on the elevation that it's actually growing at. But it can certainly take heat, and it will take quite low temperatures in the winter during that rest when it's going to be quite dry. Yeah? I mean, I go sometimes nearly 2 weeks between watering when they're in their total rest period, and when I water them they get a little bit, so I wouldn't absolutely soak it. I'd just put a trickle round in a few places, just sort of near the roots, just to get a little bit of hydration in, and that will stop them all shriveling up, and you take the strength out of them if the canes shrivel, so just enough to stop them totally desiccating. That's all I do. I would suggest a minimum temperature, probably 10 degrees. It can probably take a lower temperature than that, but why risk it if you don't have to? Yeah, I mean, my minimum out here in the winter is 12. That's controlled on a thermostat with a heater. Yeah, so it's not allowed to get lower than 12. Even on the coldest nights outside, my heater stops it dropping below that. And that's its minimum. Its maximum during the winter is whatever happens naturally. I don't control that. So if a bit of sun comes out, it might get up to sort of 22, 23 out here in the winter. Now in the summer at the moment, I can't say that I've got natural temperatures because of this flipping heat wave. It's already 24 degrees out here, and it's only just gone 9 o'clock. And it only went down to 21 last night, and yesterday afternoon, with totally clear blue skies, not a breath of wind outside, it actually got up above 32 in here, which I do not like. I like 27, 28 daytime temperatures in here, where I can control the humidity and everything is happy. Well, some of my shady characters aren't so happy, but they'll live with it if the humidity can stay up, just about. But this one will take a multitude of temperature ranges, but don't worry about giving it high light in the growing season. It doesn't need it. Most of the dendrobiums that come from deciduous forests have got leaf cover during the wet season, the growing season. Yeah, so they're not high light lovers like your cattleyas and the like, yeah, vandas and stuff. They don't need it. But come the winter time, they need the brightest light they can get, and they need that drop in temperature. So you have to stop and think with the resting type dendrobiums. Can I do all that reasonably well without a lot of faff and fuss? And then if you can, they're good plants to grow. multitude of colours, sizes, shapes, right from miniatures up to giants, real giants. Anyway, that's a sort of look at Dendrobium senile. See you next time.